Washington must reel in these big-time targets.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back in to another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com, 50% off your first year. Lars, we got a really fun show coming out all the everydayers today. Just a quick reminder, wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure to click that like button, subscribe, and click that little bell. It all helps this channel out a whole heck of a lot, especially as we're in this offseason. Lars, we got so much fun recruiting talk that you and I wanted to get to today. We're going to break down some of our favorite prospects in the 2026 class who we think might be getting some more national attention as the summer evaluation period comes to an end, and then into the fall of their senior year and everything like that. But we wanted to spend the majority of this time talking about the most important outstanding targets, whether it's flip targets who've already been on campus for an official visit, or just guys that are not committed yet. We wanted to go through both sides of the ball. Usually we start on offense, but today we're starting on defense because of five-star edge rusher Tristian Givens.
Another guy that, until proven otherwise, and as I wrote on Huskies Wire, the more you think about it, the more you start to ponder it. Where the Brandon Arrington discussion we had, where I said 30 was probably more like 3%, not 30%. But we wanted to have that discussion there, just have some fun there and ponder that thought. But Tristian Givens is a guy where the other two schools are Tennessee and Texas A&M, and that's it. And so you keep hearing, I saw something about USC and somewhere in that.
He was originally had USC, and Florida State was like the remainder of his top four. And so they were in the mix there for a while.
But I just want to clarify because I saw that this week, like over the weekend or this week. So I haven't heard any legitimate smoke on USC. So I think when you look at those three finalists, if you want to call it, and then the commitment date on June 23rd, like Washington really seems to be in a good position for him, as we've discussed on the show. And I think you can talk about the loss of Kari Wilder. You can talk about a couple of losses. Getting a 5-star out of the state of Georgia, like when you talk about the most important, like going back to maybe Buddha, a handful of others, like there's not a more important player to get than Tristian Givens, period.
So I like where you're going with that. I was going to use a different word. I was going to say impactful. Because it's one of those things where, you and I talk about, I think a guy like Derek Coleman-Brusa and a guy like Cody Green are just as important in that regard because they are, both guys with a lot of local ties, obviously. Since both of them are originally from the state of Washington. I would use important with Tristian Givens because he's somebody that when you just not only look at the stature and all of these other things that, the 247s and the on threes of the world and be like, whoa, look at this top 25 player in the country, which, when you talk about optics, that is an important, just measurement, but you look at just what he is as a just fit for Ryan Walters' defense as this true outside linebacker who at 6'4", 215, certainly, has some room to go in terms of putting on weight and, maybe getting up to 230, 240 by the time he's a junior or senior at the college level, but is just such an explosive, high ceiling athlete that you could utilize where, you and I watched Russell Davis in this spectacular game against UCLA. Don't you just see, I would never put an expectation of, hey, this kid is going to have a 3-sack game in his college career on literally anybody ever, because that's unfair. But it's one of those things where you see how Russell Davis was utilized in that, again, it was a Steve Belichick defense, but just as that true outside linebacker, just explosive pass rusher who can set the edge a little bit with his really long arms, but just find ways to consistently get to the quarterback. Every once in a while, he drops into coverage. Tristian Givens would fit that mold so perfectly. And when you combine that with the relationships that he has with Washington staff and the phenomenal job that they did keeping this under the radar until the very last minute, and then just swooping in there to reschedule his visit and take him away from Florida State, I think they've done such a phenomenal job with this. And I think you're right that Washington is in a great position here because you look at, Tennessee and Texas A&M and just kind of where they seem to sit in some of the quotes that he's had about them in recent weeks and months. And it's not that he doesn't like them. Let's be very clear about that. But I think that the relationships that he's developed with Washington's coaching staff, especially director of recruiting Marcus Griffin, I think those are the things that at the end of the day, if he puts on a Washington hat on June 23rd, we're going to point to and say, this is why Washington won the day. But Lars, we could spend a whole show talking about what kind of impact Tristian Givens would have on this program. But there are several other defensive linemen that I legitimately believe could have a similar high level of impact. And I think the number one guy outside of Tristian Givens is 4-star defensive tackle Umu-Cais.
The biggest potential impact, I think, if you look at, both in stature and just in importance because of where he's at. I know recently took an official visit to UNC, but a guy that once that Washington offer came in, it just seemed to change things. And, obviously he didn't know it necessarily right when that offer came in from Ryan Walters to practice, but it just kind of was symbolic of the nature of a guy from Colorado was somehow hidden and now exploded. And I think, certainly, gotten the right ranking and building and things like that. I do think he's a guy where I'm not saying, fits into the third segment exactly, but a guy who I think will continue to rise. And so when you talk about keeping just Western, now not West Coast, but Western talent home, obviously he's from Colorado. This is a guy where obviously he mentioned Vita Vea, which both you and I love to hear when he got his offer, but it really, he does look like a true interior guy that can just be a disruptor and a plug and like a run stuffer in that respect. But just a true out-and-out dominant interior defensive lineman, those don't come by very often. And the fact that Washington sits so well with him, I think is incredibly impressive.
I agree. And that's why I have him at number 2, because this is something where I've been talking to some sources from outside of the UW program over the last couple of days and weeks and everything. And we've spent a lot of time talking about Umu-Cais. And one thing that I got independently from people with that either work with or have sources with several different programs have all said the exact same thing, is he is the best pure defensive tackle west of Texas, just like straight up. And this is not something that, I'm coming and saying this is my opinion. I do believe that same exact thing, but it's nice to hear that multiple schools have had that same thought. And in the Big Ten, that is so, so important to have that kind of guy where I don't know if he's big enough to play that true nose, in my opinion. I think he could and get by at his size, a lot like how Omar Khan kind of lined up in that same spot during spring practice at different points in time. But he's just somebody who, if you have him in your defense, he can be a game wrecker. And somebody else who I think has a very, very high upside on the interior, especially who a couple of guys we want to get to here, is 4-star defensive lineman David Schwerzel from nearby O'Day High School, who he's set to commit on Thursday. He's deciding between UW, UCLA, and Stanford. So he's got a UW crystal ball. Very curious to see how that one's going to end up playing out. I feel pretty confident in that one at this point in time, but it's something where, we've seen Washington miss on several targets. And this is just another guy, a big, versatile defensive lineman, where he probably is going to play more on the interior than on the edge, in my opinion. But he's such a good athlete that you can ask him to line up anywhere. And at that size, with that frame, you can see him turning into a legitimate piece in a Big Ten defense.
Exactly. And I think when you pair him with Derek Bruce as the two, in-state defensive linemen, well, that is a premium. Like that, when you talk about
that, yeah.
And I think that, ironically gets back to what one of us said a few months ago. It's like, I don't know if you're going to take both O'Day guys just because it's going to be a hard sell. One might want to create their own path. And obviously, Ciale chose to make his own path down East Lansing. But I think that's why, Schwerzel was going to always, and this is no slight to Ciale, just slightly higher on the staff's list because of that, because he could do so many different things. And I think with Schwerzel, that's why he got that 4-star bump, right? I think a couple months ago or whatever it was, because you can see the projectability where he's not just an edge or he's not just an outside guy. You can do a number of different things with him, whereas Derek might be that just true edge rusher, run setter type of guy. And that's exactly what you needed to build out half the defensive line with. Now you go to the other half and you get Tristian Givens and Umu-Cais. You put that together, and you are really sitting pretty if you're Jason Cabusi and Ryan Walters, because you have the size, length, you have everything you need to not only hang in the Big Ten, but actually dominate in the Big Ten.
So I agree. And then if you are able to pair that with, an elite level corner like Davon Benjamin, who's just such an impressive prospect, he's set to arrive on his official visit on June 20th. We're going to have more on him in the coming days, but he is somebody who I wanted to make sure we mention here because he's just somebody where this is already a really, really solid corner class, as the Everydayers know, not just corner, defensive backs class. We've discussed that for a while, but adding somebody of that caliber, who Washington has made a big push with him for a very long time. They did a great job staying in this race and emerging as one of his favorites and securing this official visit. And if you're able to seal the deal with him, having somebody like that who, like we're expecting Takari Davis to be this fall, just somebody who can turn into a true lockdown corner on the outside is such an important part of this defense. But Lars, there are several prospects on the offensive side that we need to get to too. Right after a message from our friends over at Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKDOWNCollege at monarchmoney.com, 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKDOWNCollege for half off your first year. Lars, as we move over to the offensive side, there are a bunch of guys that, we're looking at as, hey, this would be a really fun flip prospect. That guy would be a really interesting fit in this offense. And I think that for me, the number one guy that I'm looking at right now is 4-star wide receiver Daniel Odom, who's currently committed to Oklahoma. And he's somebody where, just a big, really nice route runner on the outside, explosive, good playmaker with the ball in his hands, can run after the catch. And I think when you look at like that X receiver position where we're going to see Denzel Boston line up a lot this year, just like we did last season, I think he's somebody who could fit that role really well. We look at, what that position might look like in the coming years where, Rasheed Williams probably going to be competing for some reps at that spot with Justice Williams, Deji Ajose. Having a guy like Daniel Odom in that mix as well is a really exciting thought, in my opinion.
Oh, no doubt. And I think, when you look at one of the two Bosco ballers, I think Odom is – I'm starting to, come to your side a little bit more where it's not to slight Madden Williams. I can see that route working out, no pun intended, a little bit more. Because when you talk about all the things you mentioned, where he's got that, the prototypical X kind of frame and high football IQ to where he knows either one of those guys, Madden Williams and Daniel, know how to high point the ball, know how to go find the ball because they're coming from a smart offense and just a good, solid high school coaching staff, which is what Kevin Cummings, ironically, when we talked to him last spring, he was like, we love guys that come from, kind of, strong high schools. And it's not to say that you're sliding one high school over another. But the good coaching that you're getting at Bosco, you're just getting it even better at Washington when you come to the next level. And I think that's why you're kind of targeting, Oklahoma wanted them. Like why they wanted them so early on in the process. But I do think, with that coaching change and, just some scheme things. And also when you look at Washington, just, staying close to home, beating an SEC school. I think that's important when you're talking about Washington establishing yourself in the Big Ten. You need to be able to pluck some SEC commits. You need to be able to say, not only can we beat him out just for an uncommitted guy, but a guy who has already been committed there for a while. I don't remember exactly when he committed to Oklahoma. I do know it's been.
I think it was like December, January, somewhere in that ballpark.
I was going to say, I knew it was towards the end of last season, but I think that's why, again, I mentioned, since then there's been a few things that changed down in Norman, and obviously Washington's been trending up for dozens of guys. And I think kind of Odom has started to see coming back out, and especially being out there with Zam, and I do think that was very helpful. Where we talked about, when we had Derek on the show, you could kind of just see why, football-wise, like everybody wants to play for Derek, who wouldn't, especially as a quarterback. But then you look at it and think, like, yeah, like that's a guy I can see as my teammate. That's, now I see who you guys, especially being out in New Jersey, I'm not going to be able to play with him. Usually, the reason why I bring that up is because usually your quarterback commit is either from the West Coast or California. So these guys might have a better relationship or at least know more about them. That I think was pretty telling where, hey, Daniel does come up, does make that visit. Oh, and by the way, your quarterback commits coming out. That was pretty telling for me.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that is, something that I'm going to continue to keep an eye on over the coming weeks, months, because that could end up being a deciding factor if he does decide to, make that flip, because you don't take that visit if you're not legitimately interested in doing that, because it seems like if he does end up flipping, it'll be either Washington or Florida State, since he also ended up taking an official visit there. So I'm just curious to see how that process is going to play out. But one other guy that we certainly need to talk about at the wide receiver position, I say in air quotes for all our audio only listeners, is Salesi Moa, because this is a guy who, we've talked about him a lot. It doesn't seem like Washington is the favorite, but they did a really good job making up a lot of ground and just certainly establishing themselves as a legitimate player in the race for his services. And he's somebody where if you want to sell him on playing both sides of the ball, great. If you want to look at him and say, hey man, we want you to be that X receiver right now. And maybe, you put Daniel Odom or somebody, assuming that they end up joining the boat as well, since I think this is going to end up being a 3 receiver class, putting him at the Z or whatever, you find ways to make that work. I think Salesi Moa is the kind of guy where, you and I have said this multiple times. You just have a scholarship spot open for him. And wherever he ends up playing. And you're happy with that because he has that level of talent. So he's one guy that I think is very, very important where, if you end up missing on a guy like that, I'm sure fans are going to be disappointed. I don't know if it'd be the end of the world, but he's somebody where if you add him to this class, there have been so many rumors, and you and I have discussed a lot as well, of Washington has a legitimate shot of closing on a top 15 class. If you want to achieve that, you find a way to get a commitment from Salesi Moa.
And it's worth noting, by the way, nothing you said, I disagree with it, but worth noting that this isn't the case of a very good defensive player who happens to have 6'2", 6'3" size, so his high school offense puts him at wide receiver, and you're saying, hey, you know what? If this is, we'll kind of throw everything in the kitchen sink. I remember the JTT commitment when it was like, oh, hey, we're going to offer you in basketball, and then Ohio State offers you in basketball. It's not like that where you turn on the tape, and if you just take away his defensive stuff, he's probably still a 4-star receiver prospect. I truly mean that. Where you look at his ability to high point the ball, I think a lot of that does stem from his ability as a DB and reading and reacting, kind of understanding what receivers are trying to do. But that's kind of why, no matter where Salesi Moa ends up playing, both in college and on the field in college, I truly don't think it matters. And I think if it happens to be a receiver, you're more than happy with that because,
I agree.
Okay, he's a great DB, but man, I'll take, what do you want to say, average year by your sophomore year, 8 to 10 touchdowns a year, and 7 to 10.
No, please go ahead.
The only reason I say that is because again, you can see what Jedd's offense is building. Where Denzel had 9 last year in year 1 with the terrible offensive line. You build that out 2, 3, 4 years down the line. That's what you're trying to do. Where the upper echelon Big Ten teams, you're having those type of offenses.
So I agree. I just don't ever want to put any kinds of expectations like that on somebody where it's, hey, this is going to be a 10 touchdown a year player. I just think that's unfair. I don't think what you're saying is wrong. And I understand where you're gathering that. I just look at that from a different perspective of, yeah, that's certainly a lot of expectations for any 16, 17-year-old player, right? Like it's something where no matter what their stature is, where there's so many examples you can point to of recruits that did work out and it's, oh yeah, obviously that was expected of them. And then the other side of like, oh, this guy came in and was a top 40 prospect, whatever. And, didn't amount to nearly what he was hyped up to be because that's just part of recruiting. That's just part of this whole talent acquisition evaluation process, which is certainly interesting. That's just my 2 cents on that matter. But with that said, there's one more guy I wanted to talk about, and it's 3-star offensive lineman Pule Primus. This is somebody who, Lars, I think, to knock us for a minute, I think we have done a really bad job of hyping this guy up because I went back and for something I was writing on Huskies Wire the other day, and I watched his film again and I said, oh, this is an awesome fit for just this Jedd Fisch offense where I think he is a long-term developmental take. But being a 3-star offensive lineman from Midland High School in Texas, you certainly want to have those Texas guys on the roster. And at 6'4", 325, he moves so well and he is so strong. You watch that, I think that, when I say developmental prospect, I think it's the issue that literally 99% of offensive linemen from the high school ranks have. So it's not a knock on him in any route, is you just need to continue working on pass protection because he plays in, just one of those wing T style offenses where it's a lot of downhill running. And when they ask him to be the lead blocker, he puts people in the ground. He explodes through to the second level. He is such a nice mover. And with that combination of size and strength, that's somebody who, 3-star running back commit Hanson was tweeting about him over the course of this last week. And hey, this is a big dog that we have coming on campus. I certainly agree. And he's somebody where, we look at the rest of this offensive line class and, after losing Colin Campbell to Michigan State, after losing Sam Uchu to Alabama, this is one of the reasons where if you are able to close on this guy, where, you and I were talking about, hey, I wouldn't be too concerned if you're able to land this guy. He's somebody who long-term, I certainly see the vision because he is so strong, just so powerful.
Grade A name, Just grade A. Just taking him on the name alone. But then, yeah, you turn on the tape, you see it. And I think this is also why we trust Michael Switzer so much, why we see the developmental belief in him, because, yeah, you're not thinking, first of all, this is a guy where you're talking about you got this. You can't coach size per se in terms of, you either got it or you don't. But I'll take that run blocking ability, and then we'll figure out the pass pro as we go along, because when you talk about the Big Ten, you got to run the ball. And so I think anytime you can come in with a guy that has that raw strength, you always take him.
Oh, absolutely. And that's something that you and I are going to keep an eye on more on our Friday show, because he'll be on his official visit then. But Lars, there are so many risers that we think Washington did a good job getting in on early, and through the course of their senior season, we might see him get another star. All right, let's continue with the offensive line theme here, because there are so many guys that you and I talked about. Washington did a really good job getting it on early with X player, Y player. It's a theme with not just this coaching staff, but the way Washington has always recruited. It's getting in the door early and developing long-term relationships with these guys that end up winning the day. And I think one case where, it was very significant that they did that, especially when as early as they did, is with Dominic Harris. He's up to 36 offers now, including the most recent batch being Texas, LSU, and Georgia. And that's something where, the talent evaluators be damned to, whatever it is that they do. No matter what you think of this guy, seeing that kind of interest from some of the nation's other top programs is certainly significant. And, that alone shouldn't constitute a 4th star. But combining that with his elite size, the movement ability for that size, and just great strength all around, he's somebody who I think by the time signing day rolls around in December, people are going to be saying, wow, Washington got a real steal with Dominic Harris.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of, as you were listing off all those reasons, why would you look at him and not think 4-star? I'm struggling in terms of, now again, maybe some people don't want to swallow the pill. Oh, hey, maybe I was wrong about this guy. Maybe he is a 4-star. We said he was a 3 originally. It's like, well, maybe he got better. Maybe maybe you saw something the second time or third time around, whereas Michael Switzer might have saw it the first time around the entire way. But it's why, the talent evaluation with Washington is so important, because when we see Washington be the first or second or third offer to some of these guys, and other schools are showing interest but not following and reciprocating with an offer, and we might wonder, and fans might wonder, was that a good offer? Does that make Washington look bad that they're the only one that offered? It's like, no. And this is why. Because when other schools start to realize and come along, or maybe, he gets more playing. I mean, if it's the case of, none of this is the case. The other thing with Dom, he's got like you mentioned, he's got the size. He's got everything you need to be a 4-star lineman. And we could probably run through the 247 list right now where I said, give me Dom Harris or this guy. Dom Harris or this guy. You're probably taking Dom Harris more often than not. And that's no slight to the other recruits, of which I'm not even listing. And by the way, why does Z always catch a stray? It's X and Y. Z never gets mentioned. It's kind of crazy. I just wanted to get that off my chest. Like, Z always catches a stray. For no reason, Z catches a stray. But almost like Dom Harris catching a stray, it's like, why is he a 3? Like, there's no reason he should be a 3-star. And again, at the end of the day, do rankings matter? No. But yes, because you talk
because of the optics,
but also you look at the CFP. How many teams have ranked in the top, like below say 35 in the recruiting rankings? Pretty rare. And so it's pretty hard to find that. Now again, good coaching will match that, which again is why, whether he's a 3 or a 4, that's the Michael Switzer thing here. That's why when these guys are fast risers and they get on campus, they will also be fast risers on campus, because you have the coaching to match.
Absolutely, because it's one of those things where, they're like, everybody is obviously entitled to their own opinion on this, where, a lot of our everydayers will say, oh, hey, well, this is another 3-star take. Like, what's going on with this? What's going on with that? And it's why you and I do make a point to, at times, emphasize, like, hey, this is why we believe this player should be a 4-star. We've been saying that for months with Umu-Cais, is because, the optics at a certain point are going to be important. But at the same point in time, like, that stuff does go away once you get on campus. It's not, oh, hey, this guy's, a 5-star player and he deserves X, Y, and Z because of it. No, that's part of the beauty of college football, is you never know what's going to happen once a player gets on campus. But especially in the case of somebody like Dominic Harris, not only is it a, testament to the hard work that these players have put in for years and years to get to this point, but it's also, when you look at it at the end of the day, and I mean, it's like, I'm not going to call out anybody, but, people should know who I'm talking about when I say this. And it's, oh, hey, like, Washington is a surprise player for this 5-star prospect, just throwing that out and not even mentioning them in certain points. It's like, no, this is why it matters, because not everyone is paying attention to Washington in the same way that you and I are. Like that's just the reality of the situation. And it deserves the recognition of somebody who has these. It's why we bring up these SEC powers that are offering Dominic Harris, is because at the end of the day, oh, hey, no, that shows that this player is talented enough to go to a program that has won however many national championships it is now in the last 8 years in Georgia. And, and LSU obviously has theirs as well. Those are things that at the end of the day do matter. And I think another person that falls in the same boat, because you and I have so many thoughts that we can share on that, another person that falls in that same boat, in my opinion, is Dre Pollard, his teammate at W. Clark High School. And he's somebody who we've seen him already take a big time jump. And, I think the track background is certainly something that's very, very helpful there when, he's the state champion in 100, 200, and 400 meter dash. Like, yeah, those are things that at the end of the day are going to help your projectability. Look at Brandon Arrington, where his elite track speed and elite athleticism are certainly things that play into those higher rankings. But somebody like Dre Pollard, I feel like he really has gone underrated since his commitment by some fans, around the country in this fan base. And I think that's okay, because it's, oh, hey, this is a guy that like got offered late. Maybe you don't know a whole ton about him, but he's somebody who through the course of his senior season, especially if, as you and I have talked about a lot, if he ends up being just defined as a running back and he focuses on just that for his senior season, I think we'll see that jump because of all the traits he possesses. And again, we saw him make that jump where he's ranked above Dominic Harris on 247 Sports, just in terms of players from the state of Nevada. So clearly that interest is like starting to ramp up. And I think that's a really good thing, but I think there's still another gear that he can kick it into by just, I don't want to say choosing a position, but having the coaching staff saying, hey, this is our development plan for you. These are the things we want you to focus on in your senior season.
Great word choice. Great word choice there at the end there. But with that being said, I 100% agree. And it's something we talked about before the show, which is I think now that you've identified where he's going to play, like truly, because he is listed as an athlete, worth noting on 247 and probably on Rivals as well. But with that being said, you look at it and think, okay, 3-star athlete, no doubt. But with the fact, it just made me think like, if he's ranked ahead of Dom Harris, just think about how good that talent is. When you just read raving about Dom Harris, it's like imagine that, and now you have Dom blocking for him at the next level. I think that to me, and also what Scotty Graham can do with running backs. I think that again, that doesn't factor into the recruiting rankings, but I just think to tie this into a Washington perspective long term, like whether he ends up being a high 3 or he may potentially get to 4. I think that's why Scotty Graham evaluated and was like, hey, I want him. Like I know John Richardson, Taylor Mays, you guys might want him on defense. I think I can work wonders with this guy on offense. And Scotty Graham's one of the day one Jedds, like one of the original Fisch. Like he's been right there with Jedd, since he got into coaching, honestly. And I think when Scotty can probably lean on Jedd and say, I can. You and I both know Scotty pretty well. How much you want to bet Scotty leaned in during one of those recruiting meetings and said, I got this. And that soft Scotty tone where it's like, it's like, I can work with that guy. I can do something with him. And I think, it's not Jordan Washington per se exactly, but it's in the mold of like such a dynamic guy with the ball in his hands. You can figure that one out pretty quick.
Oh, absolutely. And that's such an important part of this where, you just think about these elite playmakers where I think Quade Carr is just a similar guy that falls in that discussion where it's just somebody with all the traits that you're looking for, or maybe doesn't have necessarily the interest that, some fans might look at and say, hey, this is another guy that you should look at. But that's where, you and I like to go back to the other side of the stars discussion, because it's not a one-sided discussion and it never will be, where it's, hey, yeah, there are players that, fall under the radar for one reason or another. And it's, you have all the elite traits and it sometimes just takes the right coaching staff to unlock it. And I think that's the case with Dre Pollard. And I feel like that's something where, in terms of, especially where he's ranked, but you see the play on the field, friend of the pod, and CJ Lavender, where he's somebody where, you and I were a little confused about what position he might play as things started coming to fruition, where it's, hey, this guy looks like he could play nickel, he could play outside corner if you want him to, he could play safety. And of course he comes on the show and tells us, yeah, I'm going to end up playing safety at the next level, which you and I really appreciate for several reasons. But it's one of those things where if he ends up playing more of that for modern day this season, It's one of those things where he does have a lot of big time offers from big time programs around the country. And, when you look at just not only how like Washington just winning that recruiting battle and everything, but just what he can do in his senior season in the Trinity League, that's one of those guys where if you are able to go out and ball out in that league, that is certainly significant because whoever you're matching up against in league play week in and week out, the likelihood of that player on the other side of the field also having a D1 offer is significantly higher than it is in any other football league in the country.
I was going to say, it's one of those where if you're lining up against you in the Trinity League, you're probably lining up against each other more likely than not over the next 3 to 4 years as well in college. I think whether it's at the same school, in the same conference, even in non-conference play in the CFP, the track record for these guys and where they go. And I think also the modern day effect in there as well. I'm not saying he'll get the bump because of being a modern day, but the coaching there. Same thing with Bosco, where it's like, those guys that are 3 stars at Bosco are low or come into their senior year at 3 stars and end as 4s. It's like, they finally took that senior jump because, by the way, the guys that they're replacing are now in college. So like that's kind of how this operation works, where why he wasn't a 4-year starter? It's like, well, God forbid a guy is in a starter for 4 years in modern day. Just God forbid. Like, same thing with a bunch of schools like that, where as long as it's your time, and it's same thing in college, where when your number is called and you show up and show out, you're going to get that bump. And then you see that on draft day where, you know what, he might not have been a 2 or 3 year starter, but he's a guy who's always been around the ball, always been a constant player. It's a day 2 draft pick easily.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the videos tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether it's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star reviews. It does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Friday.